This I believe. I teach teenagers. That means I'm proficient in the subtle ways teenagers let you know how they're feeling. As I'm starting off a class this past year, I hear Izzy's frustrated sigh as she looks at Sabrina, who rolls her eyes. I hear their murmurs about how unfair I am, impossible the task is, etc. I know I have my work cut out for me with this class. I believe human connections is the key to successful teaching. I have entered classrooms incredibly prepared, and at times shamefully unprepared, but that does not determine the success of the lesson. My connection with my students and their connections to each other determine how well my students learn. I teach an integrated science class in a project-based learning style that requires my students to take charge of their learning and decide how they will go about completing a task or solving a problem. As I was explaining one of the first tasks we were to carry out in groups in my classroom, I could feel the dissent. Students were sighing, eye-rolling, and words like too hard, impossible, she's not teaching us, were quietly being whispered at each group table. I changed my tone defensively and added in a few lines about independence and that the skills of self-sufficiency, self-directed learning, and collaboration would be used extensively in this class. In a real push to make my point, I explained that they were in high school now, not middle school, and more was expected of them. As you can imagine, this was not received well, and the sighing, slumping, and eye-rolling continued. I've been teaching for 22 years now, so I'm adept at identifying the leaders in my classroom and know that getting them on my side is important to sway the class my way. Eventually, my goal is to create a family atmosphere where we all care about and respect each other. And to get to that end, I need to identify and attract my leaders. I could tell Izzy was one of those leaders, but I could also tell she could not stand me. She was intense, used to doing well in school, and liked to know what the task at hand was, with clear directives as to how to proceed. So my idea that she and her group just sit and observe a candle burning and eventually be able to explain exactly what was happening on a macro and microscopic scale with little other direction was infuriating to her. She felt the task was somehow pointless and simple, yet impossible at the same time, and was letting me know in every way she knew how at 14 years of age. My initial tactic of pushing back and reminding the class that this is what they signed up for, we have a curriculum night for incoming freshmen every spring, so the class format was no surprise. That was not helping move the class along. In fact, each day I could sense the dissent was growing in numbers and strength. Rather than do what was asked of them each day, the students started along the give-up path, where they don't talk about science much at all, but rather about their social lives, jobs, sports, etc. A very polite way to let me know that they were not interested. After a few days of this, where they would barely produce anything and I would constantly redirect each group back to the candle, I decided to give up along with them. I joined their conversations about their sports and jobs and talked about my own love of running and disdain for babysitting as a teenager. Izzy, my biggest anti-fan, was resistant until the day I heard her talk about skiing. I'm an avid skier and have an app on my phone that records my top speeds. I pretended not to notice her complete disinterest in my additions to her conversation, and even called up the app to show her that I had broken 60 miles per hour a few times last season. That was the pivot point. She was impressed and believed me. I was not just being polite, I was a real skier too. We began to connect on our love of speed, competition, and aversion to the idea that girls don't get into sports like boys do. That was when the connections started to form. First with Izzy, her intensity about sports and feeling understood by me in that sense somehow changed her attitude about the class. She became the can-do leader in her group and eventually started buzzing around the room to other groups to give them ideas and get them going. Soon her shift in attitude shifted others and moved towards working together as a family began. We still spent time each day talking about our personal lives, but it wasn't as a way to avoid the work anymore, but as a vehicle to feel valid and make the work feel worthwhile. I firmly believe that human connection must happen before any real learning can happen. I'm still interested in delivering effective lessons and being prepared for my classes, but I don't view getting to know my students as just a natural side effect of being together anymore. I see it as the foundation and the most important part of my job. Now, when students seem off track and talking about something other than the content I am hoping to cover, I dive in rather than deter. And this is what grabs them and makes us a class together. Human connection took a big hit in mid-March due to COVID and the precautions schools had to take to keep us safe. We were relegated to our laptops as our only vehicle to connect to our students. This is when I really felt just how valuable human connection was, when it was much harder to generate. It's not about being popular with my students, but it's about my students feeling seen and heard and finding ways, any way, to connect with each and every student. I believe it is our humanity that is what connects us and makes us feel part of something, and that is what we need in order to truly teach and learn.